The klaxons hadn't stopped screaming for 3 hours. Orthek pressed his rebreather mask tighter against his face, the familiar hiss of recycled air a comfort amid the chaos. Around him, the training facility's main chamber had transformed into something that shouldn't exist, a writhing nightmare of impossible geometry and bleeding reality, where pristine white walls once stood, now pulsed membranes of shifting color that hurt to look at directly. Trainee Orthak, Death Corps of Krieg. "Report!" The vox beat in his ear crackled with Instructor Nervik's voice, but something was wrong. The words came too slow, stretched like taffy, and underneath them ran whispers in languages that predated human speech. Orthak didn't respond immediately. He was busy digging. The entrenching tool in his hands, standard issue, carbon-folded steel with a reinforced edge, bit into what had once been the ferrocrete floor. Now it was something else, something that bled when cut, something that screamed, though whether the screams came from the floor or from the vox channels, Orthak couldn't tell and didn't particularly care. He'd been taught to dig. When the instructors had asked him during orientation what he'd do if faced with an impossible scenario, his answer had been simple. "Where's my shovel?" They'd laughed. Kriegsmen were known for their grim determination and their love of trenches, but this was a tactical assessment facility, not the mud-choked hellscape of their homeworld. They weren't laughing now. "Orthak!" Nervik's voice again, more insistent. "The scenario has... Something's gone wrong with the hololithic generators. We're reading massive reality fluctuations. Evacuate to..." The transmission died in a squeal of feedback. Through the chamber's observation windows, now more like eyes than glass, Orthak could see the instructor's booth. Nervik was there, along with 3 other training cadre, but they were moving in slow motion, their forms distorted as if seen through heat shimmer. One of them was pointing at something Orthak couldn't see. Another was reaching for an alarm that had been sounding for 3 hours straight. Time was broken here. Orthak kept digging. Around him, the other trainees had panicked. 47 souls had entered the tactical crucible for the final assessment. Human, abhuman, and transhuman alike. The Imperium's training doctrine had evolved since the dark days when only baseline humans served. Now, they stood alongside Ogren auxiliaries with their massive frames, lithe void-born who'd never felt natural gravity, and even a pair of Tempestus scions whose augmetics gleamed in the stuttering light. Most of them were screaming, some were firing their training weapons, Lascarbines loaded with non-lethal stun charges at threats that probably didn't exist. Probably. It was hard to tell anymore. The training scenario had been designed to simulate a boarding action against a space hulk, infested with genostealers. Now, actual claws were ripping through the walls. Actual chitin gleamed in the half-light. Actual acid hissed where it dripped from mandibles that had no business existing outside a simulation. "Contact front," someone shouted. Orthak recognized the voice. Vexia, a void-born sharpshooter with reflexes like a coiled spring. Her training rifle spoke twice in rapid succession, the stun pulses illuminating a shape that lunged from the shadows. It looked like a genostealer. Moved like one too. But when the shots hit, reality rippled outward like waves on a pond, and the creature's form scattered into 1,000 shrieking fragments before reforming. Orthak's hole was 3 feet deep now. The substance beneath the floor resisted his shovel, but it yielded. Everything yielded to persistence. That was what Krieg had taught him. His homeworld, that poisoned sphere where humanity survived in underground hives and fought wars measured in generations, had been unforgiving. But it had taught its children that surrender was not in their vocabulary. A shadow fell over him. Orthak looked up to see Sergeant Karnas, one of the Tempestus scions, her power armor's servos whining as she moved. Even without lethal ammunition, she was imposing. 7 feet of muscle and augmetics, her face a mass of scars and bionic replacements. "Kriegsmen!" she barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "What in the Emperor's name are you doing?" "Digging, Sergeant," Orthak replied, his voice muffled by the rebreather, but clear. "I can see that. We need to form a defensive perimeter, establish fields of fire, coordinate with..." A tentacle erupted from the wall behind her. Not a simulation, not a hololithic projection. A real physical appendage, thick as a human torso, covered in suckers and hooks and things that might have been eyes. It wrapped around Karnas's waist and yanked. Orthak's shovel came up in a practiced arc. The blade bit deep into the tentacle, parting flesh that sprayed iridescent fluid. Karnas's augmetic strength allowed her to tear free, and she stumbled backward, cursing in 3 languages Orthak didn't recognize. "Digging," Orthak repeated, returning to his hole. "When reality breaks, you need something solid. Foundation. Defensive position. High ground if possible. If not possible, low ground will suffice." Karnas stared at him. Around them, the facility continued its transformation. Into impossible space. The ceiling had become a sky that showed stars that shouldn't exist. constellations that formed patterns that suggested meaning but refused to be understood. The floor rippled like water, solid enough to stand on but flowing with currents that pulled at the boots. "You're mad," Karnas said. But she didn't leave. Instead, she activated her combat shield, a shimmering barrier of energy that could stop a bolt round, and positioned herself to cover Orthak's position. "How deep are you going?" "Until I find something stable, or until I die, whichever comes first." Orthak's shovel struck something hard. Metal. He cleared the strange flesh soil away to reveal a deck plate. Actual metal marked with serial numbers and imperial aquilus, part of the original structure before whatever had happened had happened. He struck it 3 times, testing. Solid. Real. The sound of metal on metal was the most beautiful thing he'd heard in hours. "Here," Orthak said. "Defensible position." Karnas didn't question him. She'd seen enough combat to recognize when someone knew what they were doing. Her Vox clicked active. "All trainees, rally to grid reference." She paused, looking around at the impossible geometry. Grid references were meaningless when space itself had become fluid. "Rally to the Kriegsman with a shovel." It would have been funny under other circumstances. They came in 1s and 2s. Vexia arrived first, her rifle still, smoking from sustained fire. She was bleeding from a dozen cuts, her void suit torn but her eyes sharp. Behind her came an Ogren named Threx, carrying 2 other trainees who'd been injured. The massive Abhuman was crying, tears streaming down his broad face, but he moved with purpose. "Boss man says dig," Threx rumbled. Threx helps dig. The Ogren's massive hands, each the size of a dinner plate, began scooping away the strange soil. What had taken Orthak minutes took Threx seconds. Together, they cleared a space large enough for the growing group of survivors. Because that's what they were now. Not trainees. Survivors. More came. A tech adept named Quillen, her mechadendrites sparking and malfunctioning in the reality storm. 2 stormtrooper candidates, their names lost in the chaos, who moved in perfect synchronization. A sanctioned psyker called Zeal, whose eyes glowed with barely contained power, and who muttered prayers to the Emperor in an endless stream. 23 survivors out of 47. The others were gone, taken by the things in the walls, or scattered into parts of the facility that had become separated by gulfs of broken space-time. Orthak directed them with the economy of motion that characterized his people. Threx, continue expanding the perimeter. Vexia, elevated position for overwatch. Karnas, establish firing positions. Quillen, see if you can make sense of any systems still functioning. Zeal, do not, and I cannot. Stress this enough, do not attempt to use your powers unless absolutely necessary. The psyker nodded, sweat streaming down his face. "The warp is wrong here. Stronger. Hungrier. I can feel it pressing against my wards." "Then keep your wards strong and your mouth shut," Orthak said, not unkindly. Psykers were dangerous at the best of times. In a situation where reality itself had become negotiable, they were walking bombs. He returned to his digging. The others might think he was mad, but there was method to it. The original structure was still here, buried beneath whatever nightmare had overlaid it. If they could reach it, anchor themselves to it, they might have a chance. The shovel struck metal again, then again. A pattern emerged. Orthak mapped it in his mind, building a 3-dimensional image of what lay beneath. Deck plating, support struts, what might be a reinforced bulkhead. "Quillen," he called, "can you determine our location relative to the original facility structure?" The tech adept scuttled over her remaining functional mechadendrite, extending a scanner. Crimson light washed over the exposed metal. She muttered in binaric cant, communing with the machine spirits, then looked up. "We're approximately 17 meters below where we should be. The floor level has descended. Or we've ascended into a pocket dimension that intersects with real space at this point. The mathematics are troubling. Can you access the facilities network?" There is no network. Or rather, there are 17 networks, all occupying the same space, but existing in different temporal frames. I'm detecting signals from before the incident, during it, and from what appears to be 2 hours into our future. Also, several signals from times that don't correspond to any known chronology. Orthak nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Can any of them help us?" Quillen was silent for a moment, her cybernetic components humming. Then, "There's a message addressed to you specifically, from Instructor Nervik. Timestamp indicates it was sent 5 years ago. Read it. Trainee Orthak. If you're receiving this, the contingency protocols have activated. The scenario has become real. This is not a malfunction. It's intentional. Project Crucible was designed to identify those who could survive true impossible scenarios. You are being tested. The facility contains 5 nexus points. Find them. Activate them. Survive. This is your final assessment. Glory to the Emperor. Nervik out." Silence fell over their small perimeter. Even the sounds of the reality storm seemed to diminish, as if waiting for their response. Vexia spoke first. 5 years ago? He sent this message 5 years before we even entered the facility? Time is broken here, Zeal said quietly. Cause and effect have become suggestions. Karnas slammed her fist against the metal plating. This is insane. They deliberately triggered a warp incursion for a training exercise? How many have died because of this madness? Orthac continued digging. His shovel revealed more of the underlying structure. He could see now that they were standing on what had once been a major support junction. Reinforced. Stable. Good. It doesn't matter if it's insane, he said. It matters that it's real. 5 nexus points. We find them. We activate them. We survive. Sergeant Karnas, your assessment? The Tempestus Science Anger. Visibly warred with her training. Training 1. If this is the assessment, we complete it. Sir, I formally request permission to organize the squad for tactical operations. Orthac looked at her. Looked at all of them. He was a trainee, same as they were, but somehow, without election or decree, he'd become their leader. Perhaps because while others had panicked, he'd dug. While others had sought escape, he'd sought foundation. Granted, organized defensive rotations. We'll use this. Position as a base of operations. Teams of 4 for exploration. No one goes alone. Quillen, continue attempting to access any useful information from the fragmented networks. Thrax, I need you to... The Ogren interrupted him, which was unusual for the normally deferential Abhaman. Thrax hears something. In the walls. They all froze. Listening. At first, there was nothing but the ambient chaos. The whispers, the screams, the sound of reality grinding against itself like tectonic plates. Then, Orthac heard it too. Rhythmic. Mechanical. A pulse that grew stronger with each beat. Boom. 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 Defensive positions, Karnas barked. The survivors moved with practiced efficiency, forming a perimeter around their small area of stable ground. Training rifles came up, stun charges primed and ready. The wall directly ahead of them began to bulge. The membrane of twisted reality stretched outward, pushed by something massive on the other side. The booming grew louder, faster, until it sounded like a giant's heartbeat. Then the wall tore open. What emerged defied easy description. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, standing perhaps 15 feet tall, but its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, legs jointed in places they shouldn't be. A head that was more suggestion than structure. Its skin, if it could be called skin, rippled with colors that had no names, and across its surface ran symbols that burned to look at. But what drew Orthac's attention was the weapon it carried. A blade, massive and baroque, covered in runes that wept blood. A chaos artifact pulled from the warp itself. Emperor's mercy, someone whispered. The thing regarded them with what might have been eyes. It opened what might have been a mouth, and when it spoke, reality screamed. Aspirants, it said, the word carrying weight that pressed down like a physical force. You seek the nexus points. First, you must prove you're worthy, Orthac corrected. Automatically. The creature's head tilted. What? Worthy? Not worthithy? If you're going to kill us, at least use proper pronunciation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature began to laugh. The sound was awful, like glass breaking mixed with children crying, but it was unmistakably laughter. I like this one, it declared. Very well, small digger. You shall have your chance. Survive, my children. Find the first nexus. Prove that humanity's reputation for stubborn refusal. To die is not merely propaganda. The creature stepped back through the tear in reality. The wound sealed behind it, leaving no trace it had ever been there. Well, Vexia said into the silence that followed. That was fucking terrifying. Contact, one of the stormtroopers shouted. They came from everywhere at once. Not the massive creature, but smaller things. Hundreds of them. Each about the size of a human torso, skittering on too many legs, mouths full of crystal teeth. They poured from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, everywhere except the small area Orthac had cleared. The entrenched tool, it seemed, had done more than just dig. It had established a boundary, a claim on reality that even the chaos couldn't fully breach. But that boundary was small, and the tide was vast. Fire, Karnas commanded. Last fire filled the air. The stun charges, designed for training, were laughably inadequate against creatures pulled from nightmare. They hit, they caused pain, but they didn't kill. The swarm kept coming. Orthac's shovel came up. The blade, sharpened countless times on the whetstones of Krieg, bit into the first creature that reached their perimeter. It split in half, spraying that same iridescent fluid. The creature's death shriek sounded almost relieved, as if being killed was preferable to existing. Aim for the joints, Quillen called out, her auspex showing weak points in the creature's biology. They're more vulnerable where A tentacle caught her around the waist, yanking her off her feet. Threx's massive hand caught her ankle, stopping her progress. The Ogren and the tentacle engaged in a brief tug of war that the Ogren won, hurling the tech adept back into the defensive circle with one hand while crushing the skull of an attacking creature with the other. "Threx not let friends get eaten!" he roared. The battle became a blur. Orthac moved with the efficiency his people were known for. No wasted motion, no unnecessary risks, each action calculated for maximum effect. His shovel was an extension of his will, and that will was simple. Survive. Hold the line. Protect the foundation he'd built. Vexia's rifle spoke in a steady rhythm, each shot finding a target. She'd switched from stun charges to her backup weapon, a stub pistol with actual bullets that she wasn't supposed to have. Orthac decided not to ask why she'd smuggled a lethal weapon into a training exercise. Right now, he was grateful. Karnas fought with the brutal efficiency of the Tempestus Scions, her combat shield serving as both defense and weapon. She'd discovered that the energy field could disintegrate the creatures on contact, and she used this knowledge ruthlessly, creating a wall of death at the perimeter's edge. The two stormtroopers, Orthac still didn't know their names, fought back-to-back with synchronized precision that suggested either long partnership or neural linking. Where one aimed, the other covered. Where one reloaded, the other provided suppressing fire. It was beautiful to watch in a grim way, and Zeal, the Psyker, stood in the center of their formation, eyes closed, lips moving in constant prayer. At first, Orthac thought he was doing nothing. Then he realized the creatures that came too close to Zeal simply stopped. They froze mid-lunge, their forms flickering as if they couldn't quite maintain existence in the Psyker's presence. "I'm not attacking them," Zeal gasped, sweat pouring down his face. "I'm just asserting reality, reminding the universe what the natural laws are supposed to be, but I can't hold it much longer." "You don't have to hold forever," Orthac said. "Just long enough." "Long enough for what?" "For me to dig us an exit." While the others fought, Orthac had continued his work. His shovel struck the metal deck plating in a specific pattern. 3 strikes to the left, 2 to the right, 1 in the center. He'd found the access hatch during his earlier excavation. Now he just needed to open it. The locking mechanism was buried under a foot of that strange flesh soil. Orthac dug with mechanical precision, ignoring the battle raging around him. Trust your squad. That was the lesson. Each person had their role. His was to dig. Got it. He found the release lever, yanked it. Nothing happened. He struck it with the shovel. Still nothing. Cursed quietly in Krieg's harsh dialect, then wedged the shovel's blade under the lever and put his full weight on it. Metal screamed. The lever moved. The hatch cracked open with a hiss of equalized pressure. Below was darkness, but it was natural darkness, not the supernatural murk that filled the rest of the facility. Orthac could see the gleam of metal walls, the blink of indicator lights. Real space, untainted. "Everyone, down the hatch, now," he ordered. They moved in reverse order of skill. The injured first, helped by Threx. Then, Quillen with her malfunctioning augmetics. Vexia maintaining covering fire. The stormtroopers descending in perfect synchronization. Karnas, next, her shield creating a barrier of energy. Orthac prepared to follow, but Zeal grabbed his arm. "I can't go down there," the Psyker said. His face was pale, strained. "Someone has to seal the hatch behind you, and someone has to stay up here, to anchor the reality you're taking with you. If we all go, this pocket will collapse. The passage you found will close. You'll be trapped in whatever dimension this hatch leads to." "That's not acceptable," Orthac said flatly. "It's not negotiable." Zeal smiled, and it was the saddest thing Orthac had ever seen. "I'm a Psyker. We're taught from the day we're found that our lives belong to the Emperor, to be spent where needed. This is where I'm needed. Go, find the nexus points. Stop this madness. That's an order from the last sanctioned Psyker of Squad 7. Orthac wanted to argue, but the creatures were pressing closer, and Zeal's reality field was flickering like a dying lamp. There was no time. "Your sacrifice will be remembered," Orthac said formally. "I certainly hope not," Zeal replied. "The last thing I want is to be famous for dying in a training exercise that wasn't supposed to kill anyone. Now get out of here before I change my mind and doom you all out of spite." Orthac descended into the hatch. The last thing he saw before the metal door sealed above him was Zeal, standing alone in a circle of stable reality surrounded by an ocean of chaos. The Psyker raised one hand in farewell. Then the hatch sealed with a finality that felt like a coffin closing. The passage beneath the hatch was a maintenance tunnel, one of thousands that honeycombed the facility's substructure. Emergency lumens flickered to life as Orthac descended the ladder, their sickly yellow glow revealing walls of industrial gray metal and floors marked with hazard stripes. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Sound off," he called down. One by one, the survivors reported in. 22 now, where there had been 47. 23 if you counted Zeal, but Orthic had a feeling they wouldn't see the Psyker again. That thought sat heavy in his chest, but he pushed it aside. Time for grief later. Now was time for survival. He dropped the last few feet to the tunnel floor, his boots ringing on solid metal. The sound was pure, clean, unmarred by reality's distortion. Here, at least, the laws of physics still applied. Quillen, status report on our location. The tech adept was already interfacing with a maintenance panel, her mechadendrites plugged into data ports that had probably gone unused for decades. Binary chatter filled the tunnel as she communed with machine spirits that seemed almost confused to be spoken to. "We're in sub-level 7, she reported. According to the facility, schematics, which miraculously still correspond to actual reality down here, were approximately 400 meters northeast of Training Chamber Alpha. That's where we started." "Only 400 meters? Vexia shook her head. "Felt like we crossed half the station." "Space-time distortion," Quillen explained. "The warp incursion has created non-Euclidean geometry in the affected areas. Distance becomes subjective. We might be 400 meters away by the original blueprints, but experientially, we could have traveled kilometers." Orthac processed this. "Can you access the facility map? Identify possible locations for the nexus points?" "I can access the map, but..." Quillen paused, her mechadendrites twitching. "There's something wrong with it. Or right with it. I'm not sure which. The map shows structures that don't exist in the official blueprints, subchambers, hidden levels, entire sections that were never part of the original construction. Project? Yeah. Crucible," Karnas said grimly. "If Nervik sent that message 5 years ago, they've had time to modify this place, build in whatever tests they wanted." Or, one of the stormtroopers spoke up. His voice tagged him as Trooper 1 in Orthac's mental catalog. "The warp incursion is showing us what's always been here, hidden in the spaces between." "Does it matter?" Orthac asked. "Hidden or new, if it exists, we can navigate it." Quillen, overlay the anomalous structures on the standard. Map. Highlight anything that could qualify as a nexus point. The tech adept worked in silence for several minutes, her augmetic components humming. Finally, a hololithic projection sprang to life above her outstretched palm. It showed the facility in layers, the standard structure in blue, the anomalous additions in red. Where they overlapped, the image flickered between both states. 5 points glowed bright yellow on the map. Each was located in a different section of the facility, and each was surrounded by areas marked with symbols that Orthac recognized from Imperial danger codices. Extreme hazard, warp contamination, structural instability. "The first nexus point is here," Quillen indicated a location 1 level up and 300 meters west. "Chamber designation, Alpha 9 Tertius. Original function, ceremonial hall for training graduation ceremonies." "Current function?" Orthac asked. "Unknown. Sensors show massive energy readings, but the signature is confused. Its reading is both active and inactive, both present and absent. Schrodinger's nexus point, if you will." Vexia groaned. "I hate quantum states. They never end well. Does anything end well in this place?" Trooper 2 muttered. Orthac studied the map. The route to the nexus point was relatively direct, a straight shot through the maintenance tunnels, then up a service shaft, then a brief traverse through what the map labeled as a storage depot. Simple, which meant it would be anything but. "We move in standard formation," he said. "Karnas takes point with her shield. Threx provides heavy support in the center. Vexia on rear guard. Everyone else maintains spacing and watches their sectors. We don't know what we're walking into, so assume everything is hostile until proven otherwise." They moved out, following the tunnel northwest. The lumens flickered overhead, but they stayed lit. Small mercy in a place where mercy was in short supply. There. Footsteps echoed in the confined space, a rhythmic percussion that helped maintain unit cohesion. Orthac kept his shovel ready. It was a tool, not a weapon, but today it had been both. The blade was notched now, marked with use against enemies it was never designed to face. He'd need to sharpen it when they got out of this. When. Not if. The tunnel opened into a junction where 6 passages converged. The map indicated they needed to take the northwest corridor, but as they approached, Orthic noticed something wrong. 5 of the 6 passages matched the map perfectly. Gray metal, standard dimensions, regulation markers. The 6th passage, the northwest one, was different. It was alive. The walls pulsed with a rhythm that suggested breathing. The floor was covered in a substance that might have been moss, or might have been flesh, or might have been something with no terrestrial analog. And from deep within came a sound like singing, beautiful and terrible and completely mad. "That's not on the map," Quillen said unnecessarily. "Alternate route," Karnas suggested. Orthac consulted the hololithic display. The other passages led away from their objective, looping through residential sections and training halls before dead-ending in areas the sensors couldn't read. They could navigate those unknowns, but it would add hours to their journey. maybe days, if time was as broken elsewhere as it had been in the main chamber. We go through, he decided. Through the nightmare corridor that's singing to us. Vexia's tone was incredulous. That's the plan? The direct route is always preferable to the long one. Speed is its own form of security. Orthac paused, then added, plus, anything that obvious is probably a test. They want to see if we're smart enough to take the hard right over the easy wrong. Or, Trooper 1 suggested, it's a trap designed to kill anyone stupid enough to walk into it. Then we'll be the smart kind of... Stupid, Orthac replied. Karnas, shield at maximum. Threx, stay close to her. If something grabs her, you yank her back. Everyone else, weapons ready. If it moves, shoot it. If it doesn't move, shoot it anyway. And whatever you do, don't listen to the singing. Kind of hard not to listen to it when it's that loud, Vexia muttered. But she checked her weapons and fell into position. They entered the passage. Immediately, the temperature rose. Not gradually. One step, they were in the cool climate control of the maintenance level. The next, they were in humid warmth that made their armor steam. The singing grew louder, and Orthac could make out words now, or word-like sounds. They spoke of ancient things, of civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity learned to make fire, of entities that existed in the spaces between atoms. Karnas's shield flared as something reached for her from the wall. A tentacle, or a hand, or something that was both and neither. The energy barrier disintegrated it, but more came. Dozens of them, hundreds, reaching from every surface. Keep moving, Orthac ordered. Don't engage unless necessary. They ran. The passage twisted and turned, its geometry shifting with each step. What had looked like a straight corridor on the map revealed itself as a spiral, a helix, a Mobius strip that looped through dimensions that hurt to perceive. The singing became words, and the words became commands. Stop, the song said. Rest, stay, become. Orthac felt the words trying to take root in his mind, to plant themselves like seeds that would grow into something terrible. But he'd been trained on Krieg, where the very air was poison and the ground was death. His mind had learned long ago to filter out the toxic, to focus only on what was real and necessary. He kept running. Behind him, someone screamed. Orthac risked a glance back and saw one of the others. He thought it was Trooper 2, standing still, staring at the walls. The man's face was slack, eyes glazed, as tentacles wrapped around his limbs. Trooper 1 didn't hesitate. He put 3 shots into his partner's chest, the stun charges at maximum power. Not enough to kill, but enough to shock the man out of whatever trance held him. Trooper 2 gasped, stumbled, and Threx's massive hand caught him before he could fall. Threx has friend, the Ogren declared, slinging the dazed trooper over one shoulder while continuing to run. The passage began to narrow. What had been wide enough for 3 abreast became wide enough for 2, then 1. Karnas had to deactivate her shield to fit through, leaving them vulnerable. The walls pressed in from both sides, the living substance trying to engulf them. Orthac's shovel flashed out, carving a path through the reaching pseudopods. The blade glowed now, he noticed. Not with heat, but with something else. As if the act of cutting reality had changed it, marked it with properties no standard entrenching tool should possess. They burst out of the passage into a chamber that defied all architectural logic. It was massive, easily 100 meters across, but the map showed they should be in a service shaft no more than 3 meters wide. The walls were covered in symbols that writhed and changed, telling stories in languages that predated language itself. And, in the center of the chamber, suspended in midair by nothing visible, hung a sphere of crystallized light. First nexus point, Quillen breathed. Has to be. Orthac approached carefully, his shovel ready. The sphere was beautiful, painfully so. Looking at it was like looking at hope made manifest, at the very concept of survival given form. He wanted to reach out and touch it, to bathe in its light, to let it unmake and remake him into something better. He didn't trust it for a second. Scan it, he ordered. Full spectrum analysis. I want to know what this thing is, before we try to activate it. Quillen deployed every sensor she had, her augmetics humming with activity. Lights played over the sphere, probes of electromagnetic radiation and exotic particles that Orthac didn't understand. The tech adept muttered calculations, her biological eye narrowing while her augmetic eye dilated impossibly wide. It's real, she said finally. And not real. It exists in what I can only describe as a superposition of states. Schrödinger's nexus wasn't a joke. This thing genuinely is both active and inactive until we observe it. But here's the problem. The act of observation will collapse the waveform. Depending on how we observe it, we'll get different results. Explain that in terms a Kriegsman can understand, Orthac said. The sphere is a quantum lock, Quillen tried. It's waiting for us to tell it what it should be. If we approach it with weapons ready, expecting a fight, it will become a fight. If we approach it expecting a puzzle, it will become a puzzle. If we approach it expecting salvation, it will become something else. So what do we expect? Karnas asked. Orthanc considered. What did he expect from a nexus point in a facility designed to test whether people could survive impossible scenarios? What would the designers of this hell want to see? He thought of Zeal, sacrificing himself to give them a chance. He thought of the massive creature that had promised they could prove humanity's worth. He thought of every story from humanity's long war against the galaxy, every tale of outmatched soldiers who won through sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. We expect a challenge, he said, but a fair one, something that can be overcome through skill, intelligence, and teamwork, not through power or luck, but through the qualities that make humanity worth preserving. He looked at the sphere. Show us what you've got. The sphere pulsed once, twice, 3 times. Then it shattered. No, not shattered. Unfolded. What had been a simple sphere revealed itself as something far more complex, a 3-dimensional puzzle that existed in 4 dimensions, its pieces moving through time as well as space. And from within the unfolded geometry, a voice spoke. Not the mad singing from the passage, not the reality-warping commands of the massive creature. This was a human voice, female, crisp, and professional. Nexus Point 1, Tactical Assessment. Scenario: your squad has been compromised by genestealer infiltration. 1 member is infected but doesn't know it. They will transform within the hour, identify the infected individual, and neutralize the threat before transformation occurs. You may use any means necessary. You may not kill anyone. Begin. The voice stopped. The unfolded geometry collapsed back into a sphere, but now it displayed something on its surface, a countdown timer. 59 minutes, 43 seconds. And around the chamber, doors Orthanc hadn't noticed before began to open. Figures emerged from each doorway. Human figures, or mostly human. They were perfect copies of the squad members, down to the injuries they'd sustained and the dirt on their armor. Orthanc looked at the closest duplicate. It was him. The copy stared back with eyes that showed the same grim determination, the same focus, the same everything. When it spoke, it used his voice. I'm the real Orthanc, it said. You're the duplicate. You're the one who's infected. Around the chamber, 22 voices said the same thing in 22 different tones. Each duplicate claimed to be real, claimed their original was the copy, the infected one, the threat. Orthanc felt his squad members tense, saw weapons start to rise. This was the test, then. Not just to identify the infected, but to do so without the squad tearing itself apart in paranoid fratricide. He raised his shovel, not threateningly, but in a gesture of attention. Everyone, stand. Down. Nobody shoots anybody until we figure this out. That's an order. His duplicate smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible behind the rebreather, but it was there. Good, it said. That's exactly what the real me would say, which proves I'm real and you're the copy. Or, Orthanc replied, it proves we're both thinking the same way because we're the same person, which means we need a different method of verification. He thought fast. Genestealer infection was a gradual process. It started with psychological changes. Subtle shifts in behavior, altered priorities, a growing allegiance to the hive mind. Physical changes came later. If one of them was infected, they might not show symptoms yet. But there would be signs. There had to be. Quillen, he called. Can your sensors detect biological contamination? Both Quillens responded, their voices overlapping. In theory, yes. In practice, genestealer genetic material is incredibly adaptive. It mimics the host's biology almost perfectly. I'd need a baseline to compare against, and we don't have one. Orthanc nodded slowly. No easy technical solution, then. This was a problem that required human judgment, the very thing the test was designed to assess. All right, he said. New approach. We're going to talk this through. Real squad members should have memories of everything we've been through. Duplicates might too. I don't know how sophisticated this simulation is, but they won't have the same emotional context. They won't feel what we felt. He addressed his duplicate. Tell me about Zeal. The duplicate didn't hesitate. Sanctioned Psyker, Squad 7, stayed behind to anchor reality while we escaped through the hatch. Brave sacrifice, tactically sound decision, regrettable loss. All correct, all emotionless. Orthanc felt the weight in his chest, the guilt and respect and sorrow for a man he'd barely known who'd given everything so others could continue. He smiled when he told me to leave. Saddest thing I'd ever seen. And he joked about not wanting to be famous for dying in a training exercise. Those are things a comrade would remember. A simulation might have the facts, but not the feeling. His duplicate's expression flickered. Just for a moment, uncertainty crossed its face. Then it recovered. Clever. Appeal to emotion to differentiate us. But genestealers are excellent at mimicking human behavior. They have to be, to infiltrate successfully. How do I know you're not infected and using emotional manipulation to cast suspicion away from yourself? You don't, Orthanc admitted. Which is why we're not doing this one by one. We're doing it all at once. Everyone, original and duplicate, Tell me the first thing you remember from this scenario. Voices filled the chamber, 44 people speaking at once, each describing their entry into the training facility. The moment the klaxons started, the first signs that something had gone wrong. Most of the accounts matched perfectly. But as Orthac listened, he started to hear discrepancies. One of the Vexias mentioned details that hadn't happened. The other corrected her. One Threx used words too complex for the simple Ogren's vocabulary. His counterpart stuck to the simple, direct speech patterns Threx had always used. Small differences, but enough. Carnus, Orthac called. You're trained in interrogation techniques. Can you run identity? Verification questions? Things that would trip up a simulation or a genestealer that's only had limited access to our memories? The Tempestus Scion's eyes gleamed. Both versions of her stepped forward, and for a moment they regarded each other with professional assessment. Then, as one, they began to question the others. It became a process of elimination. Some duplicates were quickly identified. Their stories had small contradictions. Their emotional responses were slightly off. Their knowledge of squad dynamics was incomplete. As each duplicate was identified, it simply faded away, the simulation acknowledging the correct answer. But some were harder. The two Quillins were nearly identical, their knowledge of tech equally comprehensive, their mannerisms perfectly matched. The two Orthacs continued to mirror each other, neither showing any obvious sign of being false. The timer counted down. 40 minutes, 30, 20. This isn't working fast enough, one of the Trooper One said. We need a more aggressive approach. Start testing people's resolve, see who breaks under pressure. Bad idea, his counterpart replied. Stress just makes people act irrationally. We need calm, logical assessment. Orthac watched the two troopers argue. Both made valid points. Both seemed genuine in their concern. But something about the exchange nagged at him. He thought back to the battle in the training chamber, to how Trooper 1 and Trooper 2 had fought. Together. Trooper 1, he said, tell me about your partner. The trooper didn't hesitate. Trooper 2, designation KX772, partner for 3 years, neural link established, perfect synchronization, exemplary record. That's not what I asked, Orthac interrupted. I didn't ask for his service record, I asked about him, as a person. The trooper's mouth opened, closed. No words came. His duplicate stepped forward. His name is Kale. He's from a hive world nobody's heard of, and he talks in his sleep. When we got our neural links, he stayed up all night reading philosophy because he was worried about losing his individual identity. He's my brother, in all the ways that matter, and I was terrified when he got grabbed in that passage because I thought I'd have to kill him to save him. That's who he is. That's who we are. The original trooper faded away without protest. Humanity, Orthac said quietly, understanding now. That's what the test is really about. The genestealers can copy facts, can mimic behavior, but they can't truly understand human connection. They're hive creatures. Individuals are just cells in a larger organism. They don't have names. They don't have relationships. They don't fear losing each other as individuals, only as functional units. He turned to his own duplicate. So tell me, copy, if that's what you are. When I dig, what am I really doing? The duplicate's answer was immediate. Establishing defensive positions. Creating tactical advantages, following training and doctrine. Orthac shook his head. Wrong. When I dig, I'm making a promise. To myself, to my squad, to everyone depending on me. I'm saying, here's where we stand. Here's ground we won't give up. Here's foundation when everything else is falling apart. It's not about tactics. It's about faith. Faith that if we just hold on, if we just keep digging, we'll find something solid underneath all the chaos. The duplicate stared at him. Then, slowly, it began to smile. Correct, it said, and faded away. One by one, the remaining duplicates were identified and dismissed. Each test was different, each question tailored to draw out the human element that simulation couldn't quite capture. The Vexias were differentiated by their attitude toward risk. One saw safety as a goal, the other saw it as a calculation to be managed. The Quillins were separated by their relationship with the Omnissiah. One recited prayers by rote. The other spoke of genuine communion with machine spirits. When the last duplicate faded, the timer stopped. 52 seconds remaining. The sphere pulsed once, then shifted. The crystallized light reorganized itself into new geometry, and from within, a key materialized. Solid, metallic, covered in symbols that matched those on the chamber walls. Nexus Point 1, complete, the voice announced. Assessment. Squad demonstrates exceptional ability to maintain cohesion under stress and identify infiltration through human insight rather than technological means. Humanity's capacity for individual bonds remains tactically significant. Key awarded. Proceed to Nexus Point 2. The key drifted down to Orthac's outstretched hand. It was warm to the touch, almost alive, and the moment his fingers closed around it, knowledge flooded his mind. Not words, but understanding. He knew where the second nexus point was. He knew what they'd face getting there. He knew what they'd need to overcome it. He also knew they'd lost 3 more squad members during the test, not to duplicates or to infection, but to exhaustion. 3 people who'd simply stopped. Their bodies remained, standing at parade rest, eyes closed, breathing but not present, as if they'd been filed away for later retrieval. 19 left now, 19 out of 47. Karnas, Orthek said quietly. We can't carry them. The Tempestus Scion looked at the 3 still figures, her jaw worked, grinding teeth, frustration and duty warring in her expression. I know. Leave them. They'll be recovered when this is over. If we survive, if they survive. When? Orthek corrected. Not if. They left through a door that hadn't existed before, marked now with a symbol from the key. The passage beyond was clean, almost sterile, standard Imperial construction with none of the warped reality they'd encountered elsewhere. A sanctuary of sorts, a reward for passing the first test. Orthek checked his squad as they walked. Injuries catalogued, ammunition assessed, morale evaluated. They were tired, scared, and down to less than half strength. But they were still moving, still fighting, still human in all the ways that mattered. Next nexus point is 3 levels down, he said, sharing what the key had taught him. We'll be passing through what used to be the facility's main reactor chamber. Keyword, used to be. The warp incursion has transformed it into what I can only describe as a reverse Dyson sphere, a pocket dimension wrapped around an imploded star. That sounds absolutely insane, Vexia said. Probably is, but that's where we need to go. And what's the test this time? More duplicates, riddles, giant monsters? Orthak shook his head. The key didn't tell me that part. Either it doesn't know, or knowing would invalidate the test. But if I had to guess, he thought of the patterns he'd seen. Psychological testing in the first. Nexus. What would come next? Physical challenge. Something that tests our ability to actually survive. Not just think our way through. Threx rumbled happily. Good. Threx is better at hitting things than thinking about things. No offense to thinking, he added hastily. Thinking is very important. Threx, just not very good at it. Despite everything, Orthek smiled behind his rebreather. Your honesty is refreshing, Threx, and probably more valuable than you know. They descended. Through the levels, following passages that curved in ways that made Quillans, augmetics, whine with confusion. The architecture here was transitional. Part standard construction, part impossible geometry, as if they were moving through layers of reality, each one less stable than the last. The temperature rose as they descended. Not the humid warmth of the living passage, but clean heat. Radiation heat, though Orthak's dosimeter remained blessedly quiet. The walls began to glow with a soft amber light that had no apparent source. We're approaching the reactor chamber, Quillen announced. Or what used to be the reactor chamber. Current readings are problematic. I'm detecting gravitational anomalies, time dilation effects, and what appears to be an event horizon, but inverted. It's pulling space-time outward rather than inward. Can we survive passage through it? Orthak asked. I have no idea. The mathematics suggest we should be instantly torn apart by tidal forces. But the mathematics also suggest this entire region shouldn't exist, so I'm not sure how much we can trust them. Karnas checked her armor's integrity seals. In for a penny, in for a pound. We've come this far. Turning back isn't an option. They reached a massive blast door marked with radiation trefoils and warnings in 17 languages. Beyond it, according to the map, was the reactor chamber. Orthek approached the control panel, but before he could input the access code, the door began to open on its own. Light spilled through the widening gap. Not the sickly glow of warp corruption or the harsh glare of industrial lighting, but something else entirely. Pure white brilliance that didn't hurt to look at, that seemed to carry warmth and weight and presence. They stepped through into madness. The chamber was impossible. It curved upward and inward, the floor becoming walls, becoming ceiling in a seamless loop. At the center, if center had any meaning in this geometry, hung the imploded star Orthak had sensed. Not a black hole, despite what physics would demand. This was something else, something that light fell into, but from which light also emerged. And orbiting the star, moving in patterns that followed no conventional physics, were platforms. Hundreds of them, each one a disk of some crystalline substance that refracted the star's light into rainbows. Some platforms were connected by bridges. Others floated in isolation. All of them shifted and moved, their orbits changing in response to some pattern Orthak couldn't quite grasp. Standing on the nearest platform, waiting for them, was the massive creature from before. It had changed, though, become more defined. The 2 long arms had shortened to something approaching human proportions. The wrong-jointed legs had reorganized. The head that had been more suggestion than structure now showed clear features, sharp, angular, beautiful, in an alien way. Congratulations, it said, and this time the word came out perfectly pronounced. You passed the first test. Humanity's ability to maintain social cohesion in the face of infiltration remains impressive. Now we test something else. And what is that? Orthic called across the gap between the door and the first platform. Your ability to adapt, to overcome, to reach the unreachable. The creature gestured to the orbiting platforms. Your second nexus point lies at the star's core. To reach it, you must traverse the platforms. But know this, they move according to laws you do not understand. They will not wait for you. They will not accommodate your biology. You must adapt to them, not them to you. That's it, Vexia said. Just platforming? Jump from disk to disk until we reach the center? If it were that simple, it would not be a test worth giving. The creature's smile was terrible to behold. The platforms exist in multiple temporal states, simultaneously. Step on one, and you may find yourself seconds in the past or future. Miss a jump, and you fall not just downward, but backward. You will find yourself at the beginning, forced to start again. And if you fail too many times, it paused. Well, causality can only bend so far before it breaks. And when it breaks, you break with it. The creature stepped backward and disappeared, leaving only its voice behind. Good luck, little humans. Try not to break too badly. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the hum of the impossible star and the whisper of the platforms moving through their strange orbits. Orthac studied the pattern, watched the disks shift and flow. There was order here, he was certain. The question was whether he could perceive it. Quillen, can you map the platform movements? Predict where they'll be? The tech adept deployed every sensor she had. Working on it. But the temporal distortion is making prediction difficult. The platforms aren't just moving through space. They're moving through time. They're where they are and where they were and where they will be, all simultaneously. Then we can't predict them. We have to react to them. Orthac turned to his squad. New approach. This isn't a puzzle to solve intellectually. It's an obstacle course to navigate physically. We trust our instincts, our reflexes, our ability to adapt in real time. And if we fall, Trooper Kale asked, then we get back up and try again. The creature said, failure means starting over, not death. So we fail fast, fail forward, and learn from each attempt. Karnas nodded grimly. Who goes first? Orthac didn't hesitate. I do. I test the route, find the pattern, mark the safe paths. The rest of you follow once I've established a protocol. He paused. And if I break causality trying, at least I'll break it with useful data. Before anyone could argue, he stepped onto the first platform. The universe tilted. He was standing on the platform. He was falling from the platform. He was about to step onto the platform. All three states existed simultaneously. His consciousness stretched across multiple timelines like a thread pulled too thin. The sensation was nauseating, disorienting, fundamentally wrong in a way that made his mind scream for simplicity. Orthac forced focus, chose one timeline, committed to it with the same determination he committed to every dig, every position, every promise to hold the line. Reality, solidified around his choice. He was standing on the platform. Only that. Only now. The platform began to move, carrying him toward the next one in the orbital chain. He could see it approaching, but the speed was wrong. Too fast, then too slow, then too fast again. Time dilation effects playing havoc with his perception. He jumped. For a moment he was certain he'd miscalculated. The gap was too wide, the trajectory wrong, the physics impossible. But his boot hit the second platform. And again, he existed in multiple states, landing successfully, missing completely, never having jumped at all. Choose, commit, solidify. He landed. 3 platforms now, then 5, then 10. Each jump became easier as he learned the rhythm, the way time flowed differently here. It wasn't about predicting where the platforms would be. It was about existing in the same quantum state they did, making himself uncertain enough to land anywhere, then collapsing that uncertainty into the reality he needed. Behind him, he could hear the others following. Some were struggling with the temporal distortion. He heard Vexia curse as she fell, then heard her starting over, then heard her landing successfully, all 3 timelines overlapping, creating echoes that confused the ear. Threx was having the easiest time, paradoxically. The Ogren's simple mind didn't try to understand the quantum mechanics at play. He just jumped when Orthac jumped, landed when Orthac landed, moved, with the unthinking certainty of a boulder rolling downhill. Don't think, Orthac called back. Just move. Let your body decide. They progressed inward, platform by platform, each one bringing them closer to the star. The light grew brighter, but it didn't blind. The heat grew stronger, but it didn't burn. This was a star in name only. In reality, it was something else. A focal point, a nexus. The second nexus. Orthac could see it now, suspended in the star's heart. Another sphere of crystallized light, but this one rotated through dimensions that human eyes weren't meant to perceive. Looking at it directly caused him pain, but looking away was somehow worse. One platform left, the final jump. But this one was different from the others. It didn't move in orbits. It didn't exist in multiple temporal states. It simply was, solid and certain and completely out of sync with everything around it. To reach it, they'd have to make a leap of faith across a gap that physics said was impossible to cross. Orthic gathered the squad on the last orbital platform. 19 souls, battered and exhausted, staring at that final gap. The distance wasn't far, maybe 3 meters, an easy jump under normal circumstances, but these were far from normal circumstances. The gap between the orbital platforms and the central platform was more than spatial. It was temporal, dimensional, conceptual. "I can't calculate a trajectory," Quillen said, her sensors sparking as they tried and failed to map the space. "The mathematics won't resolve. It's like trying to divide by 0. "Then we don't calculate," Orthac said. "We just jump." "That's suicide," one of the other troopers protested. "We'll fall into the star." "Or," Karna said slowly, "we'll land exactly where we need to be. That's the test, isn't it? Not our physical ability to jump, but our mental ability to believe we can." Orthic nodded. "Project Crucible. Find those who can survive impossible. Scenarios. Everything here is designed to test our minds as much as our bodies. The first Nexus tested our humanity. This one tests our faith. Faith in ourselves, in our abilities, in our squad." He stepped to the platform's edge, looked across the gap at the impossible star and the sphere within it. "I'm a Kriegsman," he said quietly. "My world taught me that the impossible is just the difficult that takes longer. We survived poison that should have killed us. We built cities in places that should have been uninhabitable. We stood against enemies that should have crushed us. And we did it all because we refused to accept that impossible meant don't try." He jumped. For a heartbeat, he hung suspended in void. The star's light embraced him, and he could feel its pull. Not gravity, but something else. It wanted him to fall, to give up, to accept that some things were beyond human ability. He refused. His boot hit solid surface. The central platform materialized beneath him, his landing solidifying its existence. Or had it always been there, waiting for someone with enough certainty to make it real? "Come on," he called back. "It's solid. It's real. You just have to believe it is." One by one, they jumped. Some fell and found themselves back at the start, forced to traverse the platforms again. But they persisted. They learned. And eventually, all 19 of them stood on the central platform, surrounding the sphere. The Nexus pulsed in greeting. Nexus Point 2. Physical assessment. Scenario complete. The voice was the same as before, but it carried a note of respect, approval. Assessment. Squad demonstrates exceptional ability to adapt to adverse environmental conditions and overcome conceptual barriers through faith in shared capability. Humanity's stubborn refusal to acknowledge limitations remains tactically significant. A second key materialized, identical to the first, but for the symbol carved into its surface. It drifted to Orthac's hand, and again knowledge flooded his mind. 3 nexuses remained. The third would test their courage. The fourth, their sacrifice. The fifth's nature was hidden even from the key. But with the knowledge came something else, a warning. Time in the real world was passing. Not at the same rate as in this pocket dimension, faster, much faster. Hours had passed for them, but outside, days had elapsed. The warp incursion was spreading. The facility was being evacuated. They had perhaps 6 hours of real time to complete the remaining nexuses, before the entire structure was sealed and purged with cyclonic torpedoes. 6 hours outside meant, Orthac did the mental calculation, factoring in the time dilation they'd experienced. If the ratio held steady, they had perhaps 90 minutes subjective time to finish 3 more trials. "We need to move faster," he told the others. "I'll explain on the way." The central platform began to descend, carrying them down through layers of reality, through the impossible star's heart, through dimensions that had no names. When they emerged on the other side, they were in a new section of the facility, one the map labeled as Sublevel Omega, though no such level had existed in the original blueprints. The architecture here was different, ancient. The walls were carved from single pieces of stone that showed weathering patterns suggesting they'd been exposed to, elements for millennia. But the facility was only decades old, another impossibility to add to the collection. "This doesn't make sense," Quillen muttered, running her sensors over the walls. "The mineral composition suggests this stone is billions of years old, but it's been carved with tools that won't be invented for another 1,000 years. It exists in temporal superposition, simultaneously ancient and yet to be. Project Crucible," Orthac reminded her. "They've had access to warp space. Time is flexible there. They could have pulled these structures from any point in the timeline, assembled them here in the present. But why? Why go to such effort for a training facility?" "Because," Karna said quietly, "this isn't really about training, is it? It's about finding something, or someone, They're testing us, yes, but they're looking for specific qualities, specific people who can navigate the impossible. Orthac didn't argue. She was probably right. The question was, why? What use could the Imperium, or whoever was really behind this, have for soldiers who could navigate warp-twisted reality? They moved through the ancient halls, following the pull of the third nexus. The key in Orthac's hand hummed with sympathetic vibration, growing warmer as they approached their destination. Around them, the architecture became stranger. Doorways led to rooms that shouldn't fit in the available space. Corridors looped back on themselves in ways that violated topology. Stairs descended upward and ascended downward. But there were no threats, no monsters, no duplicates, no reality storms, just silence, emptiness, a waiting quality that set Orthac's teeth on edge. "This is wrong," Vexia said. "After everything we've faced, suddenly we get a clear path? No resistance? No tests?" "The path is the test," Cal suggested. "It's too easy. That's what's meant to unnerve us." They rounded a corner and stopped. The hall ahead was blocked by a door. Not a blast door or a security hatch, just a simple wooden door, old and worn, with a brass handle polished smooth by countless hands. It looked like it belonged in a HAB unit, not a training facility. It looked normal. Aggressively, suspiciously normal. And from beyond it came voices. Human voices, laughing and talking, the sounds of casual conversation punctuated by the clink of glasses and the scrape of chairs. Orthac approached the door carefully, pressed his ear against the wood. The voices were clearer now. He could make out words. "Can't believe they're still in there. Over 70 hours. Real time? Half of them must be dead by now. Betting pool says none survive all 5. Except that Kriegsman. Did you see him? Just kept digging while reality collapsed around him. That's either brilliant or insane. Both, probably. Kriegsmen usually are." Orthac pulled back, looked at his squad. They'd heard it too. Expressions ranging from confusion to anger. "They're betting on us," one of the troopers said, voice tight with fury. "This whole thing is entertainment for them?" "No," Quillen said. "Listen closer. They're not just betting. They're assessing, taking notes. This is observation, not recreation." Karnas's hand moved to her weapon. "Does it matter? They're watching us die and doing nothing to help?" "They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do," Orthac said quietly. "Project Crucible isn't about rescuing us. It's about seeing who's strong enough not to need rescue, who can survive the impossible without help." He reached for the door handle. "Third Nexus is beyond this door. I'm certain of it. The test of courage. And I think I know what form it will take." "What?" Vexia asked. "We're going to walk into a room full of people who've been watching us suffer, people who had the power to help and chose not to, and we're going to have to face them without anger, without violence, without letting our emotions compromise the mission." He paused. "That's the courage being tested, not the courage to fight monsters. The courage to face the people who made the monsters and stay disciplined." He opened the door. The room beyond was exactly what he'd expected, and worse. It was an observation lounge, luxuriously appointed, with viewing screens covering one wall. Each screen showed a different scene from their ordeal, the reality storm in this training chamber, the duplicate test, the platform jumping. And watching those screens were dozens of figures in the uniforms of high-ranking Imperial officers, tech priests, and even a few in the robes of the Inquisition. They turned as one when the door opened. Conversation stopped. For a moment, perfect silence reigned. Then one figure stood. Orthac recognized him immediately, Instructor Nervik, looking exactly as he had through the observation window 70-plus hours ago. The man hadn't aged a day because for him only hours had passed. Time dilation worked both ways. "Trainee Orthac," Nervik said formally. "Squad survivors. Welcome to Observation Station Prime. You've done remarkably well. Better than expected, actually. The betting pool was convinced you'd all be dead by the second nexus." Around the room, several people had the decency to look embarrassed. Others just looked interested, studying the survivors like specimens in a jar. Orthac wanted to scream, wanted to grab his shovel and introduce these comfortable observers to the sharp end of real consequence, wanted to demand why, if they'd been watching, they hadn't helped when Zeal sacrificed himself, when 3 of their number had simply stopped, when they'd fought and bled and nearly died dozens of times. Instead, he stood at attention and said, "Sir, we're here for the third nexus point. May we proceed?" Nervik's eyebrow rose. Then a small smile crossed his face. "Excellent. Perfect, really. You understand." He gestured to the center of the room where a raised platform held another crystallized sphere. "There it is. But to claim it, you must first answer a question." "What question?" "Why didn't we help you?" Orthac was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, he could feel his squad's tension, their anger, their need for an answer that made this hell worthwhile. "Because," he said finally, True impossible scenarios don't come with help. When reality breaks and everything falls apart, there's no cavalry coming, no last-minute rescue, no miracle intervention. There's just you and your squad and the tools in your hands. If we couldn't survive without help, we wouldn't survive at all. This isn't training for war. This is training for the moments when war becomes something worse. Nervik nodded slowly. And are you angry? At us? At me? For watching while you suffered? Yes, Orthek said honestly. But anger is tactical noise. It doesn't serve the mission. The mission is to reach the fifth nexus. Everything else is distraction. Even your fallen comrades? Even Zeal, who died to save you? Zeal didn't die, Orthek said flatly. No one has died. This is still a training facility, however warped. You have ways to retrieve them. Otherwise, this would be murder, not training, and the Imperium doesn't waste resources on murder when there are so many useful ways to die. Around the room, several observers exchanged glances. One of the Inquisitors leaned forward, interested. You seem very certain of that, Nervik said. I am, because you're still here. If this was genuinely lethal with no way to recover casualties, you'd have evacuated when it started. Instead, you stayed. You watched. You took notes. That only makes sense if you believe you can undo the damage afterward. Orthek paused. Which means this sphere, this third nexus, is also a test. Test of whether we'll lose discipline when faced with those who had power over our suffering. Test of whether we can maintain focus despite justified anger. And if you're wrong, if they really are dead, then I'll mourn them after the mission is complete. Right now, they're Schrodinger's casualties, both alive and dead until we finish this and collapse the waveform. Worrying about them before we have facts is wasted energy. Nervik was silent for several heartbeats. Then he began to laugh. Not mockery, genuine amusement, and something that might have been respect. Emperor's bones! They said Kriegsmen were single-minded, but you're something else entirely. He stepped aside, gesturing to the sphere. Take it. You've passed the test. Most candidates fail here. They attack the observers or demand explanations or simply refuse to continue out of spite. You're the first this year to maintain mission focus despite emotional provocation. Orthek walked to the sphere, touched it. It dissolved into the third key, warm and solid. In his palm, knowledge flooded in. The fourth nexus. The test of sacrifice. He knew where it was, 2 levels down in what had been the facility's waste reclamation center. He knew what it would ask of them, and he knew that not everyone would survive it. But that understanding came with something else. A message, hidden in the key's knowledge transfer, meant only for him. 23 trainees entered not knowing this was real. 24 did know. You are the 24th. Your application to the Crucible program was approved 3 years ago. Everything since has been preparation for this moment. The question, will you continue knowing what you know, or will you reject the trial now that you understand its true nature? Orthek's hand closed around the key. Of course he'd continue. He was Krieg. They didn't teach their children how to quit. But the revelation sat heavy in his mind as he led his squad from the observation lounge. He'd known. Some part of him, buried deep, had known this was coming, had volunteered for it. Why? The answer came as they descended to the fourth nexus. Because someone had to. Because the galaxy needed people who could navigate impossible scenarios, who could stand firm when reality itself turned against them. The Imperium faced threats beyond conventional warfare, warp incursions, chaos corruption, Xenos horrors that bent the laws of nature. To fight them, you needed soldiers who'd already broken and been reforged in crucibles where normal tactics meant nothing. That's what this was really about, finding the unbreakable. Or rather, finding those who'd break in all the right ways. The Waste Reclamation Center had been transformed into something from nightmare. Where there should have been industrial filtration systems and processing tanks, there was instead a massive chamber that seemed to have no bottom. The floor ended at a ragged edge, beyond which stretched empty air, and far below, a faint glow that might have been lava, or might have been something worse. In the center of the chamber, suspended over the void by chains that had no visible attachment point, hung the fourth sphere. Encircling it, prowling on invisible surfaces, were the casualties. Zeal was there, his form flickering like a candle flame. The 3 who'd stopped during the first trial stood motionless on the air itself. Others Orthek didn't recognize. Casualties from previous years, perhaps, or manifestations pulled from other timelines. Welcome to the trial of sacrifice, a voice announced. The massive creature from before materialized beside the sphere, but it had changed again. Now it looked almost human, a tall figure in ornate armor, face hidden behind a helm that showed no features. Your fourth nexus awaits, but to claim it, you must choose. The sphere split open, revealing not 1 key, but 19, one for each member of the current squad. Each of you may take a key, the creature continued. But each key taken means one of those suspended here remains lost forever. Take all the keys, and all the casualties are permanently forfeit. Take none of the keys, and all the casualties are restored, but you cannot proceed to the fifth nexus. Take some keys, and the corresponding number of casualties can be chosen for restoration. Orthac looked at his squad, saw understanding dawn on their faces, the cruel mathematics of the choice. This is the sacrifice, the creature said. Not your lives. Your comrades. Choose who deserves to continue and who deserves to be saved. Choose wisely. Choose quickly. You have 5 minutes before the decision defaults to saving none and forfeiting all. This is insane, Vexia said. They're asking us to decide who lives and dies based on mission priorities? Not just mission priorities, Karnas said quietly. They're testing whether we can make that call at all, whether we have the moral strength to sacrifice some to save others, or the moral strength to sacrifice ourselves to save everyone. Or, Kale added, the tactical insight to find a third option. Orthac studied the chamber, studied the sphere, the chains, the suspended casualties, the void below. His mind worked through the problem with the same methodical precision he applied to digging. The keys were the obvious answer. Take some, save some, proceed with the mission. A reasonable compromise that balanced tactical necessity with compassion, which meant it was probably wrong, or at least not the best answer. Quillen, he said, the sphere. What's it made of? Unknown crystalline matrix. Why? Can it be moved? I don't know. It's suspended by those chains. The chains have no visible... She stopped. The chains aren't real. They're manifestations of the test itself. Mental constraints, not physical ones. Exactly. Orthac pulled out his shovel. This whole chamber is designed to force a choice through artificial scarcity. We can save everyone, or proceed with the mission. But what if we reject that binary? What if we just take everything? You can't just hit it with a shovel and expect... Karnas started. Orthac hit it with his shovel. The blade struck the sphere with a sound like a bell tolling. The crystallized matrix fractured, spiderwebbing from the point of impact. The 19 keys within scattered, flying outward. But instead of falling into the void, they curved in midair, each one seeking out the hand of a squad member. And the casualties, they didn't vanish. They didn't stay suspended. Instead, they began to fall, but upward, ascending toward the chamber's ceiling where light gathered like water pooling. One by one, they touched the light and dissolved into it, not dying, but transitioning, returning. The creature watched this with what might have been surprise. Then it began to laugh, the same glass-breaking child crying. Sound from before, but now it carried genuine delight. Brilliant, it declared. Absolutely brilliant. Reject the artificial constraints. Refuse the binary. That is the most human response possible. It gestured broadly. Very well, you pass. Not because you made the right choice, but because you refused to accept that only wrong choices were available. The fourth key materialized in Orthac's hand, joining the others. But this one was different. It carried weight. Real physical. Weight. As if it was made of something denser than normal matter. The final nexus awaits, the creature said. And there you will face the true test. Not of your humanity, your faith, your courage, or your sacrifice. Those are mere preludes. The final test is of your will. Your absolute refusal to surrender, even when surrender is logical, rational, and sensible. It gestured toward a doorway that hadn't existed moments before. Through there, the heart of the crucible, where reality is not just bent, but broken. Where the laws that govern existence are merely suggestions. Where you will face not monsters or trials, but the simple question, can you exist when existence itself is negotiable? The creature bowed, a gesture of unexpected respect. I look forward to seeing your answer, little digger. Then it was gone. Orthac looked at his squad, all 19 of them, now each carrying a key. Together they had the power to access the fifth nexus. The question was whether they'd survive doing so. Sound off, he ordered. Anyone who doesn't want to continue, say so now. No judgment, no penalties. You've all gone above and beyond. No one can ask for more. Silence. Then Threx rumbled. Threx goes where friends go. Friends go forward. So Threx goes forward too. Same, Vexia said. We've come this far. I want to see how it ends. One by one, they confirmed. Every single person. 19 voices declaring they'd see this through to whatever conclusion awaited. Orthac felt something in his chest. Pride, maybe, or gratitude, or simply the recognition that he was part of something larger than himself. These people, this squad, they were what made humanity worth saving. Not the technology, not the tactics, not even the stubborn refusal to die. Just this. The simple choice to stand together even when standing alone would be easier. Then we go forward, he said. Together. To the end. Whatever that looks like. They passed. Through the doorway into the unknown. The passage beyond the doorway defied description. It wasn't a corridor, wasn't a chamber, wasn't anything that could be properly called a space. It was a concept of transit, a suggestion of movement, a placeholder, where an actual location should have been. Ortha kept walking anyway. His squad followed, their forms becoming indistinct in the not space. He could see them, or rather he knew they were there, but visual confirmation became unreliable. Threx was a massive presence to his left, or maybe his right, or possibly above him. Orientation had become negotiable. This is worse than the imploded star chamber. Quillen's voice came from somewhere that might have been beside him, or might have been inside his own head. At least there, the mathematics were consistent. Here, there are no mathematics, just void pretending to be space. Keep moving, Orthac ordered. Don't think about where you are. Think about where you're going. The fifth nexus, the final trial, the question of will. Time passed, or didn't. Orthac couldn't tell. He put one foot in front of the other, maintaining the rhythm of march, trusting that motion itself was enough to carry them forward, even when direction was meaningless. And then suddenly they arrived. The chamber, if it could be called that, was the absence of everything. Not darkness, because darkness implied light's absence. This was more fundamental. It was the absence of existence itself, the void that preceded creation. But within that absence, something had been built. A throne. Not ornate or decorated, just a simple stone chair, crude and ancient, sitting in the center of absolute nothing. And on that throne sat a figure. It took Orthac a moment to recognize him. The man on the throne wore simple robes, unmarked and unadorned. His face was weathered but kind, eyes closed in what might have been meditation, or might have been sleep. Looked like a wanderer, a pilgrim, someone who'd walked long roads and earned every line in his face. But Orthac knew him. Not personally, but from every piece of imperial iconography, every church fresco, every prayer card and holy text. Every human in the galaxy would know this face, though few had ever seen it rendered so simply, so human. That's not possible, someone whispered. Orthac thought it might have been Vexia, but he couldn't be sure. The figure on the throne opened his eyes and smiled. Hello, children. You've come very far. I'm proud of you. His voice was warm, fatherly, completely unlike the golden authority depicted in the ecclesiarchy's teachings. He sounded like someone's grandfather, gentle and patient and genuinely pleased to see them. You're not real, Orthac heard himself say. The Emperor is 10,000 years dead, sustained only by the golden throne. You can't be here. You're absolutely right, the figure agreed. I'm not real. I'm a manifestation, a psychic projection created by the Crucible systems, drawing on your collective faith, your shared understanding of what he represents, and giving it form. The smile widened slightly. But does knowing I'm not real change what you feel looking at me? Does it matter whether the comfort I offer is genuine or simulated if it comforts nonetheless? Orthic didn't have an answer to that. The figure, he refused to think of it as him, even in his own mind, stood from the throne and walked toward them. Each step seemed to cost effort, as if simply existing in this void required constant struggle against entropy. The final trial, he said, is not one I designed, but one I approved of. Because of all the tests a human soul can face, this is the one that matters most. He gestured around them at the void. Tell me, why does anything exist at all? Philosophical debate, Karnas said carefully. Here? Now? Here especially. Now specifically. He looked at each of them in turn. You stand in a place where reality has no purchase, where the laws that make existence possible don't apply. You shouldn't be able to breathe here. There's no air. You shouldn't be able to stand. There's no gravity. You shouldn't be able to see each other. There's no light. And yet you do all these things. Why? Quillen's augmetics hummed as she ran analysis. Because we're bringing reality with us. Our minds, trained to expect physical laws, are imposing those. Laws on the void. We're creating a pocket of normalcy by sheer expectation. Close, he said, but not quite right. It's not expectation. It's will. You exist here because you will yourself to exist. Every breath you take is an assertion that breath is possible. Every heartbeat is a declaration that hearts should beat. You are, quite literally, arguing with the fundamental nature of this place about whether existence is negotiable. And so far, he smiled, you're winning. He gestured and the void rippled. The fifth nexus appeared. Not a sphere like the others, but something else. A seed. Small, dark, impossibly dense. It sat on the throne where the figure had been, radiating a presence that suggested weight beyond physics. The final key, he said, is different from the others. It doesn't unlock a door or grant knowledge. It unlocks potential. The potential within each of you to impose your will on reality itself. But to claim it, you must first prove you can maintain that will against absolute opposition. The void around them began to change, not filling with things, but becoming more aggressively empty. Orthak felt pressure building, a force that wasn't physical but psychological. It was the weight of non-existence, the gravity of entropy, pulling at the very foundations of what made him real. The trial is simple, the figure said, his voice growing distant. Continue to exist. That's all. Don't fight, don't strategize, don't adapt. Just be. Assert your reality against the void's nothing. Last 1 minute by your internal chronometer, and the trial is past. Fall apart before then, and you'll be recovered later, but you won't proceed. He began to fade. One more thing. You cannot help each other in this. Each person's existence is their own to maintain. You can encourage, you can witness, but you cannot share the burden. This is the final truth of being. We are each, fundamentally, alone in our existence. How we handle that loneliness defines us. He disappeared. Or rather, he stopped being maintained by their collective will, and the void reclaimed the space he'd occupied. Orthak felt it immediately, the pressure increasing. It was as if reality itself was pulling away from him, leaving him stranded in nothing. His lungs wanted to stop. His heart questioned whether beating was necessary. His mind suggested that maybe existing required too much effort, and wouldn't it be easier to just stop? No. The thought came hard and fast and absolute. No surrender, no cessation, no acceptance of the void's empty promises. He was Orthak, death corpse of Krieg, and his world had taught him that existence was earned through defiance of everything that said life was impossible. He dug, not physically. There was nothing to dig in. But mentally, spiritually, with every fiber of will he possessed, he dug foundations into the nothing. He carved out space where he could exist. He hollowed out a pocket of reality and claimed it as his own. Around him, he could sense the others doing the same, each in their own way. Threx roared defiance at the void, his simple mind refusing to understand why he should stop existing. Vexia calculated probabilities and kept finding ones that suggested survival was possible, then believing those calculations. Karnas drew on discipline, on training, on the memory of every order she'd ever followed that said, endure. Quillen was struggling. Her augmetics helped in some ways. Machine spirits didn't question existence, they simply were, but hurt in others. The part of her that was biological was being pulled hard by entropy's promise of rest. Hold on, Orthak said, though he couldn't be sure his voice carried in the void. You're part of the Omnissiah's grand mechanism. Machines endure. Be the machine. He didn't know if it helped. He couldn't reach out to her, couldn't offer physical support. All he could do was exist loudly. Enough that perhaps his certainty would resonate. Seconds passed like hours. The pressure mounted. Orthak felt cracks forming in his certainty, moments where his conviction wavered. Maybe this wasn't worth it. Maybe he could just rest. Just for a moment. Just close his eyes and let the void take over, and the shovel. In his mind, he grabbed the memory of his shovel. That simple tool, marked and notched from use. It had dug through impossible soil, had cut through reality itself, had been his companion through every trial. It represented something. The principle that persistence mattered, that tools used with determination could reshape even the most stubborn resistance. He focused on that memory, made it more real than the void. The shovel became his anchor, his foundation, his proof that he existed because he had work to do and tools to do it with. Hold. 1 minute. The pressure disappeared. Not gradually. It was there and then it wasn't, switched off, like someone had flipped a circuit. The void remained, but it was no longer actively trying to unmake them. Orthak gasped, realizing he'd been holding his breath. Around him, the others were doing the same, recovering from an ordeal that had been entirely internal but no less exhausting for it. Sound off, he managed. 19 voices responded, all of them. Every single person had held on through sheer force of will, had refused the void's seduction, had chosen existence over the easier path of nothing. The seed on the throne pulsed once, acknowledging their victory. Approach, a voice said, not the figure's warm tones, but something else, something that might have been the crucible itself, speaking through mechanisms beyond comprehension. Claim your key. Understand your purpose. Orthak walked to the throne, picked up the seed. It was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested, as if it contained the weight of possibility itself. The moment his fingers closed, around it, understanding flooded through him. The Crucible program wasn't really about training. It was about identification. Somewhere in the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, someone had realized that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't the Space Marines, or the Imperial Guard, or even the Mechanicus' weapons. It was people like them, individuals who could maintain function when reality itself became unreliable, who could exist in places where existence was negotiable, who could impose human will on chaos itself. They were being recruited for something. Not immediately, not even soon. But someday, when the Imperium faced threats beyond conventional warfare, there would be a call. and those who'd passed through the crucible would be ready. The void around them began to solidify, not filling with things, but becoming more stable, more willing to acknowledge that space existed within it. The transition was gentle, like waking from a deep sleep. When Orthak's vision cleared, they were back in the facility. Not the transformed nightmare version, but the original structure. Clean white walls, functional lighting, standardized architecture, everything precisely as it should be. They stood in the central training hall. Around them, the other candidates, all 47 of them, stood in formation. Zeal was there, looking tired but alive. The 3 who'd stopped during the first trial were present, confused but whole. Even the casualties from earlier years that Orthak had seen suspended in the 4th trial stood among them, restored and intact. At the front of the hall stood Instructor Nervik, now wearing formal dress uniform rather than training fatigues. Behind him stood the observers from the lounge, and behind them, more. Dozens of figures in military and civilian dress, representatives from branches of Imperial service Orthak didn't even recognize. Candidates, Nervik announced formally. The Crucible program assessment is complete. Of 47 candidates, 19 achieved full progression through all 5 Nexus points. These individuals are hereby designated as Crucible qualified and will receive appropriate assignment when needed. He paused, then specifically looked at Orthak. Trainee Orthak demonstrated exceptional leadership, tactical innovation, and the ability to reject false binaries in favor of creative solutions. His approach to impossible scenarios, establish foundation, maintain focus, refuse, surrender, has been noted and will serve as a case study for future programs. Around the hall, there was scattered applause. Orthak barely heard it. He was too busy processing the fact that it was over. They'd survived. All of them. Even those he'd thought lost had been recovered, pulled from whatever temporal holding pattern the Crucible had stored them in. The briefing continued, but Orthak's attention wandered. He looked at his squad, his 19. They'd gone through hell together. They'd each proven they could exist when existence required active defiance of entropy. They'd passed tests designed to break them and come out stronger. And now? What? They returned to normal training? Went back to their units? Waited for some future call that might never come? Dismissed, Nervik said finally. Report to medical for assessment, then you have 72 hours of leave before next assignment. Crucible qualified personnel remain behind for individual briefing. The hall emptied. The 19 who'd reached the 5th Nexus stayed, standing in loose formation. Nervik approached them, his formal demeanor dropping away to reveal something more genuine. I know you have questions, he said quietly. I can't answer most of them. What I can tell you is this. What you experienced was real. The warp incursion, the trials, the danger, all real, but controlled. The facility was designed from the ground up to withstand reality collapse and restore casualties. Every person who entered knew the risks, even if they didn't know the specifics. He looked at Orthak. Except you. You were the only one fully briefed on what this was before entry. You knew it would be hell, and you volunteered anyway. Why? Orthak considered the question. Why had he, 3 years ago when a recruiter approached him with an opportunity to join something classified, said yes without hesitation? Because someone has to, he said simply. The galaxy is full of impossible scenarios. Someone has to be ready for them. Might as well be me. Nervik nodded slowly. That's the answer I was hoping for. Because the galaxy needs people with that attitude. He stepped back, addressing all of them now. You're going back to your regular assignments. For most of you, that will be the end of it. You'll complete your service, retire, live normal lives. But if the call comes, you'll know it, and you'll have a choice. Answer or decline, with no penalty either way. Remember that. This is an opportunity, not an obligation. He saluted them. They returned it, the gesture automatic. You're dismissed. And well done. Truly. They filed out of the hall, back into the normal world. As Orthak walked, Vexia fell into step beside him. That was the most insane 72 hours of my life, she said. Felt longer, Orthak replied. Felt like years. She was quiet for a moment. Think they'll actually call on us? Or was this just really elaborate? Hazing? Don't know, don't care. He patted the shovel at his side. Either way, I learned something valuable. What's that? That when reality breaks, you need to be the kind of person who asks, where's my shovel? Instead of, what do we do? Tools are good, plans are good, but willingness to just start digging even when you don't know if it'll help, that's what makes the difference. Vexia laughed. You know what? I believe that. Ridiculous as it sounds, I actually believe that. They parted ways at the medical bay. Orthak submitted to the examination, let the medici staff scan him for physical and psychological damage, answered their questions with mechanical precision. He was fine, tired but fine. Crucible had tested him and found him worthy. That was enough. When he was released, he went to the armory, retrieved his actual equipment, not the training gear they'd used in the trials, Found his real shovel, the one he'd carried since his first deployment, its blade worn smooth from use. He took it to the maintenance shop and began to sharpen it. The rhythmic rasp of whetstone on steel was meditative, familiar, grounding. This was real. This was knowable. This was what he understood. A shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Threx, the massive Ogren, looking uncertain. "Boss man okay?" Threx asked. "No, I'm fine, Threx. You?" Threx not sure. Head feels strange. Like Threx bigger on inside now. Hard to explain. Orthac understood. They'd all been changed by the experience, stretched by the trials in ways that would take time to process. "That's normal. Give it time. The feeling will settle." Threx nodded slowly, then, "Boss man, if a call comes, will Boss man go?" "Yes," Orthac said without hesitation. "Then Threx will go too. Threx, not smart enough to lead, but smart enough to follow good leader. Boss man is good leader." Something caught in Orthac's throat. "Thank you, Threx. That means a lot." The Ogren smiled, his broad face lighting up. "Threx will bring bigger shovel next time, for digging bigger holes." Despite everything, Orthac laughed. "That's a good plan, a very good plan." 3 years later, the call came. Orthac was serving with his regiment on a backwater agri-world, training local PDF forces in defensive tactics when the message arrived. A simple data slate delivered by a courier who left no name and accepted no questions. On the slate was a single line of text. Impossible scenario identified. Crucible qualified personnel requested for deployment. Rally point, Segmentum Obscurus, Corvus System, Station Terminus. Report within 30 standard days. This is not an order. This is an invitation. Orthac looked at the message for exactly 3 seconds, then began packing. His commanding officer didn't question it. The orders came from high enough up the chain that even generals didn't ask for clarification. Within a week, Orthac was on a transport, heading for the Corvus System. He wasn't the only one. The reunion at Station Terminus was subdued. Of the 19 who'd reached the 5th Nexus, 14 answered the call. 5 had declined, choosing to continue their normal lives. No judgment, no penalties, just as Nervik had promised. But 14 had come. 14 people who remembered what it felt like to exist when existence was negotiable, who understood that impossible just meant difficult, who asked, "Where's my shovel?" when reality broke. Among them, Vexia, her marksmanship now legendary in her regiment. Karnas, promoted to full command of a Tempestus Science company. Kale, who'd brought his partner back to life through neural linking that shouldn't have been possible. Quillen, whose communion with machine spirits had grown so profound she could coax functionality from tech that should have been dead centuries ago. And Threx. The Ogren had brought a bigger shovel, just as he'd promised. They assembled. In a briefing room deep within Station Terminus. The walls were reinforced adamantium, warded with psychic barriers, sealed with vaults that would require orbital bombardment to breach. Whatever they were about to hear was so classified that even thinking about it wrong was probably heresy. A figure entered. Not Nervik. He'd died 2 years ago in combat, his service record noting only that he'd completed essential research. This was someone new, wearing robes that suggested inquisitorial authority but bore no marking of any particular ordo. "Thank you for coming," the figure said. "I know this was voluntary. I appreciate that you chose to answer." They waited. 3 months ago, a research station in the Halo stars went dark. Not unusual. Things go dark in the Halo stars all the time. But this station was studying something critical. A warp rift that appears to lead to a pocket dimension where reality is fluid, where the laws of physics are negotiable, where existence itself is a matter of will rather than given. Orthac felt ice in his stomach. He knew where this was going. "We need to go into that rift," the figure continued. "We need to retrieve data from the station, and possibly survivors. But conventional forces can't survive in there. Their minds break, their bodies dissolve, their equipment fails. We've sent 3 expeditions, none returned." The figure looked at them. "But we think you can, because you've already proven you can exist when existence is negotiable. You've trained for this exact scenario, even if you didn't know it. You're the only ones who might survive." Silence filled the room. Orthac broke it. "What's the mission objective?" "Retrieve the data. Survive. Return." "Expected duration?" "Unknown. The pocket dimension experiences severe time dilation. You might be in there for hours and return to find years have passed, or vice versa." "Survival probability?" "Honestly, I have no idea. Higher than the conventional forces we sent, but that's not saying much." Orthac looked at his team, his Crucible siblings he'd come to think of them, saw the same calculation in each face, the same weighing of duty versus self-preservation, the same understanding that this was why they'd volunteered 3 years ago, even if they hadn't known the specifics. "We'll need equipment," he said, "and time to prepare. How long do we have?" 2 weeks. "Then we'd better start now?" Orthac stood. "First order of business, We need shovels. Good ones. One for each person. If reality is going to be negotiable, we'll need to dig foundations wherever we go. The figure blinked. Shovels? That's your primary equipment request. Yes, everything else is secondary. You can give us the best weapons, the most advanced armor, the finest tactical equipment the Imperium can provide. But when reality breaks, when all the technology fails and all the plans fall apart, what you really need is something simple. A tool to dig with and the will to use it. He thought of that moment 3 years ago, standing in a collapsing training facility, reality screaming around him, and the first thing he'd done was dig. It had saved them then. It would save them again. Shovels it is, the figure said. Anything else? Threx raised one massive hand. Can Threx have extra big shovel? Threx has strong arms. Despite the severity of the moment, several people smiled. Extra big shovel for Threx, the figure agreed. Now, let's discuss the actual mission parameters. The briefing continued, but Orthak's mind was already working through the problem. A pocket dimension where reality was fluid. Warp-touched, certainly, but maybe something else, too. They'd need to maintain cohesion, both mental and physical. They'd need to establish safe zones, foundations of reality they could retreat to. They'd need to watch out for each other while understanding that ultimately each person's existence was their own to maintain. They'd need to dig, and they'd need to refuse surrender, even when surrender was logical and rational and sensible, even when everything said that existence here was impossible. Because that's what they'd trained for. That's what they'd proven they could do. That's what made them human. 2 weeks later, they entered the rift. What they found there would fill volumes. Impossible landscapes, entities that existed outside normal causality, challenges that tested every skill they'd learned in the Crucible, and several they had to invent on the spot. The mission took 3 days by their internal chronometers. When they returned to real space, 5 months had passed. But they returned. All 14 of them. Along with 17 survivors from the research station and data that would revolutionize the Imperium's understanding of warp space physics. The official record of the mission was sealed immediately, classified so far, above top secret that even its existence was denied. The only note in anyone's service record was a small addendum. Crucible protocol deployment, successful. But among the 14 who'd survived it, there was an understanding. They'd proven something important, that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology or its numbers or even its faith in the Emperor. It was simpler than that. Humanity's strength was the willingness to ask, "Where's my shovel?" and start digging even. When the universe itself said digging was impossible. To establish foundations in chaos, to assert existence in the void, to maintain cohesion when everything pushed toward dissolution, to survive the impossible by refusing to accept that impossible meant anything more than difficult. Years later, when Orthak was old and gray, serving as an instructor himself, a trainee asked him what the secret was. How did you survive when reality itself turned against you? Orthak thought about it for a long moment. Then he smiled behind his rebreather and said, "You dig. You find something solid, even if you have to go down to bedrock. You establish foundation, and then you refuse to leave it, no matter what the universe throws at you. Because the foundation isn't really in the ground. It's in you, in your will, in your refusal to surrender. That's the secret. That's all it's ever been." The trainee looked confused. Orthak didn't blame him. Some things couldn't be taught with words. They had to be learned through experience, through trial, through being tested in crucibles where normal rules didn't apply. But the trainee would learn if he was strong enough. They all did, eventually. Or they didn't, and that was fine too. Not everyone could exist when existence was negotiable. Not everyone needed to. The galaxy needed farmers and clerks and administrators, people who kept the normal world running. But it also needed people who could dig foundations in chaos, who could stand firm when everything fell apart, who looked at impossible scenarios and asked not, "Can it be done?" but "Where do I start?" Those were the ones who passed the crucible, the ones who answered the call when it came, the ones who dug and held and refused surrender, the ones who survived. Orthak picked up his shovel, the same one he'd carried for decades, now worn smooth from use, and walked out to the training yard. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And somewhere, in the depths of space, another impossible scenario was developing. Another crisis where conventional forces would fail and unconventional solutions would be needed. When that call came, there would be people ready for it. People who'd learned to dig. That was enough. That would always be enough. The Emperor protects, but sometimes he expects us to bring our own shovels. End.